it's Miguel. I'm sitting here with Kim, and we are here at our holy cow moment.
You're not going to moo?
I'm going to let Jay do the mooing. That was good. Me. I gave you space now, Jay, to put that in there. And that's our Connecting on Wednesday. I hope you've been enjoying these times where we sit down together and we kind of do a little bit deeper dive into the Word from Sunday. Let us know. That really does help us realize how we're doing together and how we're kind of providing a resource and a tool maybe for you to have broader conversations on the topics that we're discussing on Sundays, because in reality Sundays it's a monologue. It's not comedic monologue, it's just a monologue. If I had a couch and a band that we could just do the riffs, maybe that would be comedic.
Yeah.
And I'd have to be funny, but that's a different story. Anyway, so we're going on tangents today. So we were in the kind of like the last piece of our study in the Beatitudes as we're going to launch into the Sermon on the Mount.
Right. This is kind of like a part 2 of last week, right?
Yes, it's part 2 of last week because we were talking about a pretty heavy topic, persecution, insult. What happens when things turn against us?
Right.
It feels like everything's now turning against us, and that's not fun. And it's the part of the Beatitudes that of all of them, this is the most difficult one. And as we realize, Jesus seems to, as he's unpacking what he says is blessed, it gets a little bit more challenging. Yeah. And so that's why we took 2 weeks to talk about this particular subject. So I'm just going to read verses 11 and 12, and then we're just going to jump in.
Okay.
Verse 11 says, this is Matthew chapter 5, verse 11. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you.
Yeah, that's a tough passage.
It's not an easy one.
Yeah. But I liked how you titled it, Because of Me. And I think that is a key component to understanding this passage, but also not just understanding it intellectually, but walking it out. Because if we don't have that grasp, we're going to flounder. So can you unpack that a little bit more?
Sure.
Like, how do we do that?
So, in all honesty, I had been going back and forth. What are we going to, how do I title this? How do I take everything that's being said, even up till now, and put it in some simple phrase or, And then I read it one day. I was here at the church because we had been talking about this. Like, I hear thoughts, ideas. I got all these inputs. Like, how do we put it together? And I don't remember who it was, but we just sat down and I read it again. And I'm like, well, there it is. It's because of me. And this whole book is because of him. Yeah. Let's just be honest. Yeah. This is where it starts and finishes, and all of the middle. And when we're living our life, doing our best to live like Jesus, love like Jesus, express the heart of the Father for people and His desire to know people, it's going to rub some people the wrong way, and we're going to have to get used to that. Everything we do is not because of me as an individual, or my preferences, or even what I'm trying to achieve in life, but it has to be because of Jesus. Right. I am blessed, flourish in life because of Jesus. Right. I will experience persecution and suffering and all those things, but it's also because of Jesus.
Right. So when I was hearing you preach from this, and I was reflecting on it this morning, I remembered Eric and I went through this really difficult season, and it kind of blindsided us. So we had launched out and tried to start a new ministry, and we had been meeting with this sister church group that had a similar ministry, and we were like getting some ideas, and they were kind of mentoring us, unofficially, but mentoring us. And we were getting ready to launch this, and it surprised us because these were sister churches. And all of a sudden, there were these rumblings from this church over here and this church over here, and they were talking so negatively about our efforts to start this new ministry because they thought of it as competition instead of kingdom. And they were like really sowing seeds of negativity and opposition towards us. It was such a difficult season. I expected it from outside of the church. I didn't expect it to come from within.
Yeah.
And we were really blindsided. And my pastor at the time said, Kim, it's because we don't have a good theology of suffering. I'm like, you're right, but I don't like it. I don't like it, and I don't know how to walk this. And it took a long time, a lot of prayer to walk through that season.
Well, that you mentioned it, when I was living in Estonia, met this one of the heads of one of the major denominations in Estonia. And here is fresh out of Bible school, and charismatic, Bible school, and in Estonia, ready to take on the world, right? Ready to win the nation for Jesus, that kind of thing. He's wonderful. He's now with the Lord, but wonderful Canadian Estonian who was born in Estonia, but then during the Second World War, his parents fled to Sweden, ultimately in Canada. He was a dentist, a doctor, very successful person, but God called him back to Estonia.
Okay.
And we were chatting one day, and I was getting to know him. He was getting to know us. He says, Miguel, there's just one problem with your line of thinking. And I said, what is it? He said, you have no theology for suffering. In the camp that I grew up with, and maybe you've experienced, some of us have experienced this, is we all want victory.
Oh yeah.
We all want faith to increase and to abound, and we want to see healing, and we want to see miracles, we want to see provision, we want to see all the good stuff.
Yeah.
But when it came to the theology of suffering, we didn't have it. Matter of fact, in our camp where I came from, suffering was a reflection of you not walking with God.
Exactly. Yeah.
All of a sudden, well, there's something wrong with your faith if you're experiencing difficulty. And that's how that's how I viewed suffering.
Yeah.
But when he said that was on Sunday, I said, I've gone through like 4 major deconstructions, reconstructions. That was one of them.
Yeah.
And I spent a couple of years unpacking that one phrase, a theology of suffering.
Yeah.
And then I began to read the Bible differently. I began to hear other people's stories differently, not yet fully understanding it, right? Let's be honest, some of the thinking that we all have, that we have built into our lives over the course of years, it's hard to let go of.
Oh yeah.
And when it comes to suffering, it's a difficult one, because I have to be like Jesus, like James, like Peter, like John, like all modern day disciples, not just ancient ones, who have gone through difficult things and come out the other side. Some of them lost their lives. Some of them were restored back to whatever and thrived. Yeah. But some lost everything.
Yeah.
So that was, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
But.
Well, and we didn't grow up, like I grew up in the sense of, if you think you're walking in God's plan for you, it's almost the image of the red carpet. It just gets rolled out for you. And I had people say, not just that, it wasn't that I was doing something wrong, but you know what, maybe you shouldn't be doing this. There's too many roadblocks in this, so maybe you need to find a different path, because I don't think this is the path for you. But
so obstacles were seen as that can't be God.
That's not God's
Potential
plan.
obstacles can't be God.
Oh, definitely
not. When the full red carpet's out and everything goes smoothly, that's
then
God.
You know you're good to go.
Got it, yeah.
So then that didn't match either, because I was reading all of these missionary stories, Nate Saint and Jim Elliott and Gladys Aylward, and all of them had major obstacles. I mean, death was pretty significant. And yet the wives of these people, of these men, or the sister, I think it was Nate Saint's sister, actually went back, and they went and lived among those people that had killed them. So it didn't make sense to me that was an obstacle that meant God doesn't want you to do that, but I couldn't make sense. But this makes sense. When I read this, when I heard you preach from this, I'm like, that's what it's about. When we get, even when it's inside our own, I don't want to say camp, but even when it's inside our own family, it sometimes happens.
Yeah, and here is Jesus, who experienced tremendous suffering at the hands of his own people.
Yep.
And I, as you said earlier, I think it's what blindsides us the most, because we expect different from family.
Yes.
But I've noticed that because we're human, and sometimes family can hurt you the most. Because we're human, our guards are down. And that's not I'm not saying we all need to live with guards
no.
up, but our guards are much more down when you're in your own home with your kids or your family, cousins, whatever. And then all of a sudden that accusation is laid, that that you're no good, and those take on a completely different shape,
Right.
and they hurt us that much more.
Yeah.
Jesus makes it really plain. Hey, when you're going to preach the gospel, when you're going to live the kingdom, when you're going to live so differently than where everybody else thinks is normal, it's going to bring on this.
Yeah.
You're going to suffer.
Yeah.
And just know that it's because of me, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that's so important that we recognize it's when we live like Jesus that it's Him, it's the reflection of Him that causes the reaction. So sometimes we get in the way. We put ourselves in front of that, and they may not see Jesus. Like I've met enough people who have rejected Christianity but never met Jesus.
Right.
Right. Sometimes they don't meet Jesus in churches. I said it on Sunday.
Yeah.
It's sometimes we have to become more Christ-like and less Christian.
Right.
Because sometimes it's a sad thing,
Yeah.
but they don't always go together.
No.
Especially what culture understands as Christian, and maybe what we've understood as Christian, and what Jesus said is more like Him.
Right. So as I was listening to the sermon, one of the things that kept popping into my head was we have to keep our eyes fixed. And then you went and referenced the 2 Corinthians 4 passage. I'm like, okay, so I'm thinking the same way that Miguel's thinking. That's good. But I feel like that's a key.
It's good or scary?
Well, that too. But I felt like in the midst of it, we have to remember it's because of Him.
Right.
And that when we're going through those difficult seasons, there's two things that you mentioned. We have to keep our eyes fixed on Him. And we have to get our identity set and squared away.
Yep.
And there was a couple, I don't even know, maybe it wasn't 10 years ago, but a number of years ago, that I was praying about a specific circumstance, and I'm like, God, what is this? What is it I need to know? And all I sensed was the phrase, identity is key. And that has stuck with me for at least 7 years. I think that's when it happened. And when I was in seminary, my one professor, he's the soul care professor. He did all the soul care, divine healing, power encounter stuff. And he has
Very
this
vineyard
book.
stuff. By the
Yes,
way.
yes. And he would always challenge us, if it's between kingdom culture and your ethnic culture, your everyday culture, kingdom culture has to always trump that. But his main thing, he wrote this book called Soul Care, and one of the foundation principles is identity. And it's like the first one that he starts his book off with, and if you've got that set, you can continue to build on it. But if it's not set, if it's faulty, if there's cracks in it, you're gonna have trouble. And if you find yourself on a faulty foundation, you gotta always come right back. And I think, at least I grew up thinking, okay, I'm a Christian. I would even sign all my emails in Him because I knew it.
Right.
And you can know it intellectually, but sometimes we get tripped up and we get off of that identity foundation and we need to get right back on it. And it's almost like a daily reminder, or anytime we get to these difficult circumstances, we've got to get back and make sure, where's my identity? What does that look like? And how do I live from that? Because you mentioned that several times.
Well,
you've got to get your identity
it's true.
set.
And I think practically, every one of us, I mean, the Bible has a ton of in Him scriptures. And you can Google it and you'll get like reams of scriptures.
Yep.
It's never a bad idea.
Yeah.
If it's something that we're struggling with,
Yeah.
as a real practical thing, just simply Google in Him scriptures.
Yep.
What does the Bible say about you in Him? And you'll find there's a lot out there that you can begin feeding yourself on. I remember, you mentioned your culture, kingdom culture. When we were in Estonia, again, Estonians pride themselves, like every culture would, on certain things that are classically Estonian,
Yeah.
right? Or classically American.
Right.
Whatever those classically African American, classically Hispanic, classically Asian, whatever those are. So in Estonia, Estonians pride themselves on bluntness.
Okay.
Okay? But bluntness to the point of being unkind. And when I would try and explain to people, but that's not a Jesus culture.
Okay.
Unkindness is not the way of Jesus. I would be told, but that's the Estonian way. And I said, that's fine, that's the Estonian way. That's just not the Jesus way.
Right.
And if it's not about being American, being soft and beating around the bush and never making a point. Because Americans tend to circle the horses and circle before, unless you're from like New York, New Jersey, LA. There's certain like big city cultures where that's a little bit different, Chicago. But I'm saying, like, for a majority, we just talk in circles, hard to get to the point because we don't want to offend people.
Right.
To the point sometimes we don't make ourselves clear. But I would try and explain to our Estonian friends is what matters most is not your Estonian culture, it's your Jesus culture. And your Estonian culture is redeemed by your identity in Christ. So you can be direct in love, which would make you kind.
Yes.
And find the way of saying something that would be kind.
Right.
And that's, again, living the way of Jesus, the blessed way of what he calls blessed. The epitome of human flourishing is when you know who you are.
Yep.
And you're not afraid of who you are. Now, I struggle with identity, right? Growing up where I did, whatever experiences I had in life, those faults and failures that we all have as being human. So there are times I really struggle with my identity, even as I'm going through a deconstruction process. And what I mean by that is God's really chipping away at some things, and I'm having to reevaluate other things in my life and say, what's most important, what isn't, what is from him, what is he trying to work on, and figure those things out with him by the Spirit of God to help me. But as I'm doing that, I find that all of a sudden, who am I? Like, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And those are uncomfortable places to be. But my hope is, I believe that what God's doing is he's working himself deeper in me. So what comes out the other side looks a little bit more like him. And I identify with him in a different way. Because even the scripture says we identify him in our suffering. He identifies with us in our suffering. How is that possible if I don't understand suffering?
Right.
If I don't walk through suffering, how can I identify even remotely what Jesus went through for me? And how am I supposed to understand what he went through for me?
Yeah.
You know, so.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that identity piece because I think there's probably many people, especially I think in this season with COVID, because things shift, whether it's a job, because sometimes, let's be honest, we put our identity in that.
In our professions. And
or maybe it's, you know what, we've been home together so much. My identity's been wrapped up in my family or whatever it is. These seasons can kind of cause some of those things to surface. Like, wait a minute, my identity's been rooted in the wrong things, or it brings it up a little bit more. And I think it's so incredibly important that we work through that. So I had to take a season when we moved down here. I think I shared that I met with a friend that was a counselor, and I said, I'm struggling with this. And what I was struggling with was identity. That was the root of it. So not many people know I'm an identical twin. Did you not know that?
No, I didn't know that.
Okay, you didn't know that either.
Who's with me? What's your sister's name?
Her name is Jamie.
So is Jamie with me or is Kim with me?
Yeah, it's Kim.
Okay.
So, but this was part of my identity.
Identical twin.
Yeah. There's a lot there. But one of the things that I struggled with was my entire life, it was two of us. There wasn't a moment where there wasn't. And then as I got older, we were just lumped together as the twins. And then when I got married, I was Eric's wife, and people out in community knew me as, oh yeah, you're one of the twins, right? And Eric was getting engaged in the community. I was staying at home as a stay-at-home mom, wasn't interacting with anybody. People that I knew from my childhood didn't know me. They couldn't remember my name, but I was, you're one of the twins, right? Wait, you're Eric's wife. And I was like, I am Kim. It was so important. And I had to really wrestle with that. And I don't remember if I shared this with everybody, but being an identical twin, so fraternal twins can actually be hereditary. Like you can track that
Right.
throughout your family generation. Identical twins just kind of happens. And I almost viewed myself as, for a long time, I would say a freak of nature. Kind of just spontaneously there. And along with that twin identity thing was really, really hard. So when I was in counseling and I was walking through that identity piece, verses from like Psalm 139, fearfully and wonderfully
Yes.
made, knit together on purpose,
Yes.
became incredibly important. And I think when we're wrestling through those identity questions, going to the scriptures and seeing what God says about you as an individual and how he has created you for a purpose. He has called you. Neil Anderson, tons of stuff on identity, on our acceptance, on our security, on our hair. It's incredible. So if anyone needs that kind of encouragement, you can go to Neil Anderson information. He has like a 31-day devotional walking through all of those identity statements.
That's awesome.
Incredibly powerful when you hold on to those scriptural truths for yourself. I think it's
That's
powerful,
awesome.
and I think it's incredibly
That's
important.
awesome. So I have a question about
Sure.
being a twin.
Yeah.
If I pinch you, will she feel it?
No.
Okay.
Sorry.
It's one of those. It's one of those myths.
No, and we're identical, but we are as different as night and day.
There you go. All right.
So,
Had to ask the question.
yeah.
Because that's what we're here for.
Yep.
Deep dives.
Yep, deep dives. Deep dives.
So this is interesting to me as well, and we'll end with this, is there were three different ways in which suffering can happen, or
Yeah.
insults and persecution and all kinds of evil being
Yeah.
spoken against you. I wonder, when we're going through that, whether maybe it's an experience you've had or experiences that you've had, have you ever sensed the grace of God in those moments where you're like, I know that this is from an enemy. The enemy is not this person. There's something else that's behind all this.
Yeah.
And do you ever sense those times when God's been there with you in those moments?
Yeah.
Like as an example, going back to that time when you had the sister churches trying to figure stuff out. Did you sense God's grace there for you?
Yes, absolutely. Eric and I actually, when we heard of the rumblings, because people were really starting to talk negatively in the wider denominational group, and it really hurt. So we spent some significant time, we went to the church and we just started praying because we didn't know what else to do. And one of the things that I went to, and Nehemiah is one of my favorite books.
I love Nehemiah.
I really love it.
Yeah,
and
one of my favorites too.
and all of a sudden I'm like, Nehemiah 4, why do I need... It just popped in my head, Nehemiah 4. I'm like, okay, so I went to Nehemiah 4, and it's all about this opposition that Nehemiah is experiencing. And what I love about Nehemiah was his dedication to prayer. And he would always, one of the words that pops up frequently is remember, remember, remember. So I feel like that was God saying to me, come to me in prayer, and I'm going to remember my promises, but you're going to remember my faithfulness in the midst of it. And so I held on to that. So that was like a really powerful moment.
That's awesome.
That enabled me to walk through it.
So maybe even for some of us, as we're talking about suffering and persecution and people speaking negatively ill about you and really pushing you to an edge, maybe just talk with whoever you're with. Talk about what that was like at that moment, and how did you sense the grace of God? Because I think if we look for it, if we kind of stop for a moment, allow that, because I know for me, when I think about those moments, the frustration or the anger, like that comes in pretty quick. Like just those memories, like, oh,
They're right
those are
there.
hard. But then if I slow that down a little bit and just say, Lord, where were you in that?
Yeah.
He'll show himself to us. And he ends this with rejoice and be glad.
Yeah.
So even when it's hard,
Right.
even when we're suffering, even when people turn their back on us and on the gospel, even when there's crazy misunderstanding, even within the body there's anger and frustration, or maybe even people pulling away or rejecting, he says, rejoice and be glad.
Yeah.
Why? Great is your reward in heaven. In other words, we got to be looking for something eternal.
Right.
It's an eternal thing that we're focusing our attention on, and we can actually be rejoicing and reminding us.
Yeah.
The Scripture tells us, hey, this has happened before. So like my big idea, if it's a big idea, is hey, when you're going through this stuff, hey, it's okay to be happy, be glad, because you're in good company.
Good company. Oh, absolutely.
You are in good company. There have been amazing people who've gone through great trauma as followers of Jesus, and that's part of your heritage too.
Right.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, listen, thank you so much for joining us. It was great to sit here with Kim, find out she had a twin. And maybe we will pinch her and call Jamie to see if she felt that, or no, maybe not. Hey, listen, let us know again how these messages, how these Wednesday gatherings are, these holy cow moments. We're looking forward to seeing everybody on Sunday. Don't forget, Easter's coming.
Yep.
There's going to be advertisements and things that you'll see on Facebook as well, or on YouTube and on Instagram. Like them, share them, subscribe to them. Get as many people as we know to come and join us on Sundays at 10:30. But then Good Friday, 7 p.m. Easter, 2 services, 9 and 10:30. God bless you guys. Have a great evening.